Today is the 21st of July, 2010. We are at the New York State Military Museum. My name is Wayne Clark. Sir, for the record, would you please state your full name and date and place of birth, please?
Joseph John Schmitt, July 20th, 1941, Rockaway Beach, New York.
Did you attend school in Rockaway?
No. I attended school in Woodside, New York. That's where I lived. And 8th grade at St. Mary's and then Newtown High School.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Did you graduate?
Yeah.
And what year did you graduate?
59.
Okay, 1959. Did you go on to college at that point? No. Did you take a job?
Yes.
And what kind of work did you do?
Auto repair work.
Mm-hmm. Did you enjoy doing that?
At the time, yes. I had actually gotten into that when I was about 16, during the time I was in school, rather saying working after school.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed with that after I came out of school. And up until about the beginning of 61, being that the draft was coming,
mm-hmm.
And knowing that somewhere in the next couple of years I'd probably be drafted into the service, I decided to enlist in the Air Force, which is what I did by April of 1961.
Now, why did you pick the Air Force?
I thought I could get a career, something I might be able to learn that I could use later on when I came out of the service. That was my intent. And prior to my actual enlistment, at that time, you had to do what was called aptitude testing.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mechanics, I scored very high. If it wasn't 100, I was right under it. So with all the promises made that by the, what do you call it?
The recruiter?
The recruiter. I'm sure everybody here has been through this. You got a great future in front of you and all of that. And of course, when I enlisted it and I went in, I was hoping my primary was to get training on jet engines.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there must have been thousands of fellows at the same thing. And of course, in short enough order, once you're into basic training, you quickly find that the government's plans for you and your plans are two separate things, as I found out at that time. And so that particular part of it never happened.
Okay. Once you graduated from your basic, well, was that your first time away from home, basically?
Yes.
Okay. Once you graduated from basic training, you went on to an advanced school?
Yes.
And where and what did you do?
After I left basic training, that was in San Antonio.
Mm-hmm.
From there, I went up to Schmitt Air Force Base up in Bloomington or Normal, Illinois. It's in the southern part of Illinois. And that's where I went to tech school for just under 6 months. I was in tech school up there. And at that time, what I went into, of course, was what was called a liquid fuel systems maintenance specialist,
mm-hmm.
technician. Our first line of defense was the Atlas ICBM, which was what I was trained to work on the fueling and the pressurization systems of the rocket. And what I learned in the school during all those months was everything pretty much from the liquid nitrogen, oxygen, the RP1, the helium, all the pressurization systems, how they worked on the missile. And periodic maintenance, certain valves, certain things had to be changed on it. It was called periodic preventative maintenance. It was our first nuclear-headed ICBM. And as the earliest ones, and I believe they became operational just a couple of years before I went into the service in '59, they took, to get fired from the point of where the launch commission officer the red phone would go off from the Pentagon, to get the rocket into the air, it took 15 minutes, which even then is an extraordinary long amount of time. That would be from the go till it could actually fire would be 15 minutes. And there was a lot involved to get it off the ground. Towards the end, actually a few months before I had gotten out of the service, the Air Force was all converting to the Minuteman. And the Minuteman was a solid propelled ICBM. And the difference from the red phone going off and that rocket firing, 15 minutes for the liquid-fueled Atlas, which was what I was trained on, 3 minutes on the Minuteman, 12 minutes at over 18,000 miles an hour, heading for God knows where. The return strike time is much, much faster.
Now, were these missiles fueled at all times, or?
Oh no.
They had to be fueled?
That was what was advantageous about the Minuteman coming in. They were solid fueled. They were already loaded. So in other words, they only took 3 minutes to get that literally up on a gantry, or if it was, depending upon the type of sight it was, to get it fired. It was already loaded. Whereas the first ones, which was what I was working on, no, everything was in storage tanks. And of course, everything had to be pressurized. You had to put the RP1 into it, put the liquid oxygen into it, the helium had to go into the system. Everything had, and that took time. And that was the problem with the first ones. And, but it was interesting, working down in the silos with these things, at least at that time.
Now you mentioned some of them had nuclear warheads
They
on
all
them.
did.
Those nuclear devices were always in place?
Always in place. And they were pretty big units. Today, I guess that all that stuff has to be declassified, all these years later. But they were pretty big. The nose cones, the rockets were close on, 40, 45 feet without the nose cone on it. And then you added the nuclear nose cone on it. That had to be, I'm getting rusty, I guess, but probably 8 to 10 foot more added onto the nose of the rocket.
Did you have to be monitored for radiation exposure at all?
Everybody wore badges, whether you were working in the maintenance shops, anywhere near these nuclear warheads. Yeah, everybody had radiation badges. I personally never saw anyone or ever heard of anyone where the color changed on it, where something had leaked or whatever, in a silo or whatever. And pretty much what I remember of it.
Now, what did your typical workday consist of? You really didn't have to fuel or defuel these unless there was like an exercise going on.
Right. Normal work day was just like working a regular job. It was 8 hours a day. It was depending upon the shift that you had.
Mostly preventative maintenance?
Yeah. It was these, for argument's sake, the helium, the RP1, not so much the RP1, that wouldn't evaporate. But on the missile site, on the silos, and those silos, by the way, where I was stationed in Warren Air Force Base, that was outside of Cheyenne, Wyoming. We had silos in Colorado, Nebraska, and Wyoming. They were spread over 100 miles. And the idea at that time, of course, was the obvious. If Russians had sent one in, you could take out one silo, but you're not going to take out one complex, but you're not going to take out the whole thing. So that was the way it was, at least at that time.
Now you must have had a fairly high security clearance.
Yes, which at that time you don't think of it that way, but it was, because you had access to all the missile sites to get down to the silos. And as I had said before, if it wasn't either preventative maintenance on a certain component on the propulsion system, on the rocket, that had to be changed, a periodic, what we call preventative maintenance, then the other portion of it was, I had said the RP-1 did not evaporate. It had underground storage tanks to fuel the missile if it had to go. But the helium and the liquid oxygen and the liquid nitrogen, those did have, there was a certain amount of evaporation or loss. And every so often, I won't say so often, every day, a call would come in from an LCO, an officer on one of the sites, and it would be, we need oxygen because they're getting a reading on their panel that the pressure, the amount that they have in storage to load aboard the Missile was low, so then you'd have to take a truck or whatever, then go out and service in the liquid oxygen and nitrogen or whatever it might be that was low. So, the biggest, in my time in the service, probably nothing much ever happened, and it was pretty quiet, that's obvious. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October of '62, that one was, I think, for not just myself, but every fellow that was at least on, in SAC at that time on these bases. We had never seen anything go to a yellow alert. Anything prior to the Cuban Missile Crisis was just the IG coming out of Omaha, Nebraska, coming into the base, the investigating general, and doing surprise check, everybody got on their toes. But the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was when it went to an actual yellow alert, which is just preparatory to war. That was scary at that time. And for me, the only other thing that occurred was me and my partner were working in a silo that day on something to do with an engine, whatever we were doing. That's lost in time. But the klaxon went off, and the captain up in where they are, in the, what do you call it? The LCO, told us to button everything up and come up topside immediately, and we did. We only had a panel off, and it only took a few minutes to button everything up, and we went up the ladder and we went through these big doors. Boy, they must look like a bank vault, to get through. And when we reported into him, we didn't know what was going on, and he said, "Have a seat, just relax." He said, "The president has just been shot." And that was November 22nd, '63. And then we watched, they had a camera in there from Dallas, they had television in there. And it was, the captain was there, me and my partner, a lieutenant. I remember a couple of sergeants or something there. They were part of the crew, the missile crew. And we watched what was unfolding in there, and the rest of that was history. And for me, at the time that I was in the service, probably about the two biggest things that ever occurred to me as far as being in the Cold War, etc. at that time.
Was there any rumors that maybe the Russians were behind the assassination? And
No, I don't remember that at all. I don't. I think just all I do remember was everybody in the shock of what had happened. Yeah. But I don't recall any rumors. And even at that time, it did go to a yellow alert again, as it had during the Cuban Missile Crisis the year before. But that was quickly reverted back to a standby as they found out what happened in the hours that happened after, of course, President Kennedy was assassinated. It was pretty interesting.
Now, what rank were you when you were discharged?
In second.
And what were your living quarters like in your chow? Did you have good food?
Oh, excellent. In the Air Force, at least at that time in SAC, it was actually dormitories. And you had two-man rooms in the dormitories, had recreation room with a pool table, television. There were 2 floors, the best I can remember. I'm going to say 60 men per floor or 2 men per room. And then, of course, they would surround the chow hall. They would be set out a ways on the base. And the chow hall, breakfast, lunch, that kind of a thing. It was very routine. You worked just like an outside job. You worked 8 to 4 or whatever your shift was. You had your 2 days off, other than if something, of course, happened. And it was a very, very routine work job or whatever.
What did you do during your time off?
At that time, I had been playing guitar since, geez, I guess it was about 14 or 15. And I formed up with a couple of guys I had met in Cheyenne, and we had a band going. So on Friday and Saturday night, in short enough order, we were out working jobs. It was great. It was different in the Air Force. So we worked jobs Friday and Saturday night.
And did you consider making the Air Force a career, or you just
No.
had enough?
Only one time did it kind of tickled my mind, but it never happened. I loved Wyoming. I imagine even today, I can't imagine it's changed much. But I really loved the country out there, and the people were great. And I think it tickled my mind that if I could spend another 16 years here, I'll re-enlist. But of course, that wasn't to be. Prior to my leaving the service, already everybody was they were changing to the Minuteman. Everybody that was going to re-enlist had to go back to tech school while these changes were starting to come in, getting rid of the Atlas and moving on to the Minuteman. So none of that actually happened. A humorous thing, and I guess we all had those. Once I got out to the permanent base, and that was in December of '61, somewhere shortly after that, I found out that me and a couple of fellows that came from Illinois were transferred there. One of our job duties would have to deliver this fuel if you had to make the trip out to these missile silos. Oh, you got to learn how to drive a tractor and trailer. And that was like, well, geez, what experience? None of us have experience with anything like that. So somewhere in a few weeks, whatever it was, I know my time came and I had to report down to the base motor pool this morning, in this particular AM, and I did. And this old master sergeant, or whomever in E7 or in E8, he came out to me and said, "All right, kid, have you got any experience driving a truck at all?" I said, "Well, vans." I says, "I worked in doing auto repair before I came in. I worked for a truck place for a while. I learned I can drive a standard ship." He says, "Oh, that's good." He says, "Well, I'm going to show you some stuff." And in short enough order, I can remember an old international tractor with 15 forwards on it, 5 on the main box and 3 on the underdrive and overdrive. And he hooked up a 30 or 35 foot empty tanker on the back of it. And off we went. And he said, "You're going to have to show me a few things, get behind the wheel. And all of these gears are straight gears. There's no synchro meshes on it." And this old sergeant said, "Now you're going to have to learn how to shift this without grinding those gears." And he gave me a couple of clues and watched the tack and certain things like that. And I'm loosely going to say, in 45 minutes of with the sergeant sitting here in a tractor and riding around some of these roads around there, this is big open spaces, I could handle it a little bit. We went back to the motor pool. Stop the truck. Stop it. Okay, now you know what to do. You know your rear brakes, this and et cetera, et cetera. Yep, Sarge. He says, "Okay." He says, "Now," he says, "Go see that gate?" Now he says, "You go out that gate, you make for argument's sake, a right turn, and you follow that dirt road, and you're going to come to some old World War II barracks, because this used to be a training base during World War II." He says, "You go down there, and you practice all you want. You learn how to park this thing. You learn how to shift it. You do everything you have. And don't come back here until you know how to drive this truck. I don't expect to see you till about 6 o'clock tonight." He says, "Now go and don't come back." I swear to God, that's exactly how I learned how to drive a tractor and trailer.
Huh.
I went out and I went down there just driving and driving. You make mistakes, but you practice, you practice, you practice. Sure, you make mistakes, but you learn how to drive it too. And eventually I came back and Sarge jumped in with me. I could get by, got my license, and that was the end of it. That's how you learn how to drive. So.
Now, did you stay in contact with anyone you were in the service with?
No. Once I had left, no, I didn't stay in contact.
Okay, so you didn't attend any reunions or?
No, nothing. Matter of fact, I followed through the years occasional things in the American Legion or the VFW, but I have yet to ever come across anything to do with the Atlas ICBM or the guys in the Cold War like myself that worked on these guys. I've never seen nothing on it. Maybe one day.
So you did join the Legion?
Oh no, I didn't join.
Okay.
I had made no use of any benefits. Once I got discharged in April '64, I went to work in Denver for a short while. And then my brother called me up, my older brother from down in New York City. He says, come on back. He says, I can get you right in working for the city, driving a bus, great job and everything like that. Well, came back and the rest was history.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
and that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your interview.
Okay.